to a new episode of Artist Talks, made on behalf of Deep Dive Dance. Today, we have a very special guest. She is an award-winning performing artist with over 30 years of experience, mainly as a primary collaborator to choreographer William Forsythe and a member of Ballet Frankfurt. Incredibly inspiring, Dana Kaspersen. Currently, Dana is an author and conflict engagement specialist. Her book, Changing the Conversation, has been translated into 8 languages and has been widely used as a training tool by organizations, schools, and individuals worldwide.
Hi, Anton.
Hello, Dana. Hello.
Hey.
I would like to first take a little second to thank you for the opportunity to talk to you and to learn about your work, and I'm really appreciative.
Oh, well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
My first question to you would be how you discovered dance in your life.
Well, I think back, I don't remember exactly when I started studying dance, but I know that my grandmother said I was always dancing. And I do remember being in a class when I was a little kid and like jumping over fences and running and having just a sense of like happiness and joy inside of that.
At what point did you decide to dedicate your life to become a professional dancer? Was that a turning point?
I started training at some point, and then I did gymnastics for a while, actually, and then I went into a theater school where we had a lot of dance, and so we had lots of different kinds of dance and theater and mime and acting, and I got more and more interested in dancing. And at a certain point, I just realized that I wanted to try.
Once you became that, being a professional dancer, what it meant for you to be on stage, performing in front of live audience?
I think about the work of performers as obviously many-faceted. So one part of it is really this point of transmission. Like there's something that's moving through us, that's moving into the audience. And that's something that's difficult to define, and it's something that only dancers can do. So we're taking the language of motion and the language of form and the language of rhythm and all the different languages that we are working with, and we're translating them in a way that the audience receives something. So I feel like it's complex because it's a transformative practice. It's also like a transmission practice. And then it's a really like a everyday get in there and do your tandus, kind of like in the ditches work. So being on stage for me was this place of kind of like an expanded or enhanced sensation of life, of this kind of like almost like an emergency situation where everything is heightened. And it's something that you move into. You don't get there and do it perfectly. It's a state of action and a state of experiment and a state of exploration, failure. For me, it was a big part of the performance was the connection to my fellow dancers. So that's one of the things that I love is dancing with people, especially if you're touching people. And so the chance to be inside that kind of thinking that dance thinkers do with other people at the same time. Yeah.
And how did you discover work of William Forsythe?
Well, I was actually by accident. I was in a company in the United States, and I knew I wanted to go somewhere and work with somebody, but I didn't know where. And I snuck off during a break to Europe with a backpack, and I auditioned different places, and I didn't get in anywhere. And then I thought I knew a girl in Frankfurt, so I wanted somewhere to stay. So I called this number, and I got there. We didn't actually know each other, but she was like, "All right, whatever, fine, stay here. You can take class with us."
Yeah.
And I walked in the room, and they were in the middle of rehearsing Impressing the Tsar. They were creating Impressing the Tsar.
Yes.
And I was like, holy shit, like, what is going on in this room? And I immediately knew that this would be an amazing place to be, yeah.
What attracted you to his choreography universe?
Yeah, so it's this place where nothing is static, where even if you want it to be, everything is always changing. So there's this incredible possibility for constantly recreating not only what you're working on, but your relationship to dancing, your understanding of yourself. There's this this sense that I always have, that Bill's always been asking, okay, so what else is this also? So it's this, but what else is it also? So we're also looking at it and going, what is this else? What else does this do? It's still itself, but it also is also these other things. Mm-hmm. So being in that place where you're with a bunch of people in a room and you're trying to figure out what else is possible in where you are without abandoning where you are. So you're in this place of uncovering all the time.
What was the hardest thing for you to work with him as a dancer or co-creator?
I don't know. I loved it. It was great. I mean, of course, it was challenging in the same way that it's, the work of a performer is challenging because you're moving into the ideas of somebody and then you're making it your own idea and then you're trying to do it every night and you're running into, all of the challenges that dancers run into. And so the challenge of what I was just talking about, of this constant recreation, is exciting and challenging and beautiful and hard. So I think that, the whole thing was very challenging, but in a fantastic way. Yeah.
And was it difficult for you as a dancer to step away from dance and say, this is the moment for me, I'm done with it?
Well, it was, I actually danced until I was 50. And then at that point, my body was like, okay, you can't do that anymore. So I had so many injuries that it was in that respect, it was, I couldn't keep dancing. I know when I guess I was like 42 when my hip fell apart a little bit. I had to have a hip replacement. And then I had to move away from a certain type of dancing. And I did feel like a mourning, a sorrow for that kind of work, just because I loved it, this kind of like technically figuring out how things work physically. And so that was, I do miss that. And the part of me, when I see dancing now, there's still a part in me that goes like,
yeah, you still
try that, just because I love dancing. And at the same time, I was, what I was really surprised by is that as I started to move into this conflict stuff and to think about how to create environments for people to experience things differently, I suddenly had a completely different understanding of, like an expanded understanding of what choreography can be. Mm-hmm. So I feel like I haven't moved in a certain sense. I'm thinking choreographically all the time, and I'm thinking as a dancer all the time, and I'm not dancing in the same way. But I'm using all of the kind of arenas and the categories of decision making and struggle and investigation that I always was. Sort
of once a dancer, always a dancer, kind of.
Yeah. So I think this, the dance thinking is a very powerful practice, and I think a lot of times as dancers, coming up in the training that a lot of people get, they don't have a chance to look at it in that way. And so I think I really value dancers, and I really value the work of dancers and the thinking and the processes they go through and the years of training and their ability to think, oh, okay, now it's over. That lasted 15 years. Yeah. So I think that we've become accustomed to knowing that these things are temporary. So it's very lifelike in that way.
Yes.
And I think the practices that we've developed and worked with are really valuable and transmit to a lot of other arenas of activity.
Why conflict resolution, and what led you to this subject at all?
I guess there was a certain point in my life, there was different conflicts going on and, different areas of my life. And I saw people around me in different areas suffering from conflict. And I saw a lot of negative outcomes in conflict. And I thought there's just got to be a better way, that this just can't be the only way this can be dealt with. And I had a friend in Frankfurt who dragged me to a workshop, actually, and of Marshall Rosenberg, who was the guy who started nonviolent communication. Mm-hmm. And I had this moment in there, I've never had that before, of literally like a light bulb, where I suddenly saw this possibility. And I was like speechless. And I just got more and more interested. So I started studying for myself, just because I wanted to change the way I dealt with difficult situations. And then I just started to see how things unfold differently when people take a different approach. And so I went and I got a master's degree and really dived into it.
Why did you decide to write a book about it, the change in the conversation?
Well, so I started working with people on conflict stuff, and people would always ask me, is there a good book that I can, read? And I had some good books, but they were big books, kind of more technical books, and books that people would be like, oh yeah, I tried, but I just couldn't. And so I thought, well, it would be great to have a book that really gave ideas, gave practices, and something that people could come back to. And then I got injured, and then I couldn't walk for a summer. I was like, okay, I'll try to write this book.
In this book, which is titled Changing the Conversation and 17 Principles of Conflict Resolution, all the 17 principles are as important and vital for conflict resolution, and you cannot pinpoint one and say, oh, this one is more important than the other one. But one somehow that maybe in a place where I find myself into in my life, one somehow spoke to me about, was a bit like a light bulb for me, and it's the idea of importance of differentiate the strategy, interest, and the needs. Would you briefly explain this idea?
I really find this to be a very vital point, which is, which category are we engaging with? And I think of it a lot in relationship to dance, actually, to action. So, which direction am I facing? What rotations am I using? To become conscious of being able to differentiate. So in those categories I'm talking about, their needs, interests, and strategies. It would be like saying, a strategy is, I need a new car. Okay, that's like, I need a new car. And that's often the level that we start fighting about. Yes. We need to get a new car. We can't afford a car. What are you, crazy? Well, we have to get arguing about this. We're like that. Yeah. Pointless, usually. And interest is the basic thing that we're looking for, that the strategy might help with. So a strategy has like a million possibilities. Usually we grab onto one strategy. Yeah. Interest has many possibilities. So an interest would be like, I need to have reliable transportation. And then under that is a basic need. It might be a need for safety, for a need to be able to contribute, because I would need to be able to get to work, a need for connection. So the need underneath it is this need for safety and connection. Interest is I need reliable transport, and then a strategy would be, I need a new car, or I need to get a bus pass, yes, or I need to buy a bike, or I need to walk, whatever it is. So a lot of times we end up fighting on this level of strategies, and we get stuck. And interests are this very generative place where if we can talk on that level, we can often get something done. And usually the questions that help you get there are questions like, even if you're already fighting about strategies, you can step back and say, whew, okay, let me just try that again. I want to understand what's important for you in this. What's really, what do you care about here? And I'll let you know what I care about. And in that level, you might be able to find better ways forward.
When I read the book, and I felt like almost always we fight about strategies. And yeah, we actually take a moment to think, what is my real interest and the need in that strategy? What am I trying to get? Yeah. It was really like an eye-opener for me to think about my past conflicts personally or professionally, and think, oh wow, really, I was then fighting with someone about that strategy, but
Yeah.
my need was totally something else. And
Exactly, and that's a really powerful insight, because that means you recognize where your attention is, and that for me is the whole kind of practice and side of conflict is, where am I placing my attention? What's the impact of how I'm doing it? Am I like really just stuck on strategies, and how is that impacting my life? What happens if I really shift over and practice getting used to trying to understand what interests are? Creates a completely different landscape.
Yes,
possibility.
absolutely, absolutely. So in your book, you do say that conflict can be an opportunity for positive change.
Mm-hmm.
But how do we not forget about that in the midst of heated discussion when emotions are running high?
So it would be like if you took a person who was not trained in dance and you threw them on stage and said, go. They couldn't do it because they haven't practiced dancing, right?
Yeah.
They couldn't do certain things. If we don't practice consciously what you were just talking about, noticing where our attention is, practicing accessing the level of attention we want to, then once we're in conflict, it's too late to practice probably. You're just going to react how you habitually react. So what I find really exciting is that exactly the point that you named of, I recognized that I was stuck on strategies. That means you can shift the way you focus. And you can do that every day by practicing listening for interest, by practicing noticing what the needs are in a situation, by getting used to articulating what you care about before you start, throwing strategies at people. So when you get to a conflict, and it takes time, because we have these strong habits, but we can build new habits. So when we get into conflict, our default is not to just fall back on our habits. But our new habit can be this kind of curiosity, like, oh wow, what's going on here? What is up for you? Let me tell you what's up for me. And our emotions inside that, a lot of times people get overwhelmed with emotion and we get flooded with chemicals. To think about emotion as a flag, it's like interests and needs are down here waving emotions as flags. So if we see these emotions as signals, so we can say, I am so furious about this because it's really important to me that we have an opportunity to connect or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So the emotions are not a problem. The emotions are part of our intelligence, part of the way we think. And so if we can get used to not just staying up in the emotion and kind of like getting tossed around by it, but saying, okay, why am I furious? Or why am I sad? Why am I so frustrated? What's important to me here?
Yes.
And they can help us get down to this other level where we can go, okay, let me try this again. Yeah. Let me see what's going on here. Yeah.
If you could make someone read your book right now, one person or group of people, who would they be?
You know what? I gave up trying to get anybody to do anything.
Okay.
Because I realized it doesn't work. It's not effective to try to force people to do things. What I'm interested in is developing ways that offer people kind of methods to see where they are, to consider what they would like, to notice what they're doing, and to consider what they would like to do. So I really, I write the book, of course, with the hope that it's helpful to people. At the same time, I must say, and I remember a teacher of mine said this, and now I realize I see what she meant. Yeah, I sort of gave up on trying to tell people what to do.
Yeah.
But
it also comes up in your book a little bit when you speak about that in order to change something, we have to get to the point where we're certain sick of it. And then we can recognize, the need for stepping back or trying a different strategy or finding new ways or find for new outcomes of certain situation and frustration. That I also found quite interesting, that we as human, we're able to go until we can't anymore.
Yeah, and a lot of times to make change is not easy. And so you have to be really, you have to want to do it. And so while I'm not going to go out to tell someone how they should deal with conflict because that doesn't work. What I've noticed what happens is that if I change my approach so that I'm not like defensive or attacking people, but if I'm really curious, it does change the space between me and other people. And then they feel more comfortable talking about what matters, because everybody in conflict is there for a reason. Something matters to them.
Yeah.
And they want to be able to tell you about it. And a lot of times they'll try to tell you about it in an attack way.
Yes.
But if you have like an attack filter on and you're really used to listening for interests, then you can say, okay, so let me check in. Is this what's important to you? And they'll be like, yes, that's what I said, even if they didn't say that.
Yeah.
So building up your mental capacity, your strength of mind, and your strength of heart and your own spirit to stay with yourself and to be present with people as they have difficulty is also a really powerful thing to build.
Yeah. Well, since you kind of gave up on recommending the book, but this is the book we're talking about, and I personally recommend it to read to everyone because it's really awesome and really mind-opening and eye-opener. You already mentioned briefly about how you started to look for the ways to introduce your ideas to people or offering them opportunities to discover this work. And one way of doing this is the sort of large-scale events that you design for the larger crowds to have an opportunity to have a conversation on a difficult topic. So I wanted to ask you, how did you come up with this idea of making these events?
Well, I got involved when I was in school in a public event. Mm-hmm. It was terrible. It was super stiff. Everyone hated it. It was uncomfortable. Nobody wanted to talk. And afterwards I was reflecting like, wow, that really didn't work. Why didn't that work? And I started to think about how people were placed in the room, what their motion was, and I started to think about theater, in that theater obviously works for a reason. And I started to think about what would it look like if people were more in motion. So I started trying to think about how could I build events that use choreographic thinking in the sense of how do we configure people in space? How do we put them in motion without requiring that they have any skill at all? I partly started doing it because it was kind of a project I could do on my own because I didn't have any money and I wanted to do something. I wasn't connected to any institution or anything. So I started building these projects on my own. And each one I built got more and more into the physicality because I started to realize the more physical it was in a simple way, the more people as long as the physical tool worked as a way for them to reflect or to connect to other people, they were really glad for it.
The exchange is a kind of public research that takes place through simple actions like walking, talking, and listening. The exchange is an interactive event that's open to the community where people can come together to consider the question, how do we as individuals affect the level of violence in the world through our own thinking and actions? Using practices from the fields of both conflict resolution and choreography, the exchange invites participants to shift between perspectives and to reflect and exchange with each other on their beliefs about violence and the experiences that have led them to those beliefs. Ultimately, I see the exchange as a place to create connection and to think about how we impact and how we are impacted by the mechanisms and drivers of violence, and what we as individuals and as communities have the power to change.
And now I've started to move into, obviously because of the pandemic, I'm doing a project right now where I'm working with 9 artists from around the world in different countries, and each artist is interviewing 4 people, 2 that they disagree with strongly on a topic they care about, 2 they agree with, and the interviews are both spoken and physical. Mm-hmm. And then we're taking those and creating something out of those. So now I'm thinking about what does it look like to create maybe like a visual image of what it is to be present with disagreement, present with agreement, and to see those as mechanisms. So not as like permanent states, but things that we're moving through.
Last question. That's it, in the end. And why dance is important?
I think it's important because everything is in motion, and dancers are the people who practice getting at the motion itself, becoming skilled in understanding how they can differentiate its parts, differentiate its components, bring it together to create environments and actions and events that allow for a different kind of experience for viewers and for the dancers themselves. I think the categories of decision-making in dancing and choreography are in place in every single situation, is what I'm realizing now. And that the practice that we're doing as dancers and choreographers can be really useful in a lot of ways aside from performance, so to speak. And I think a lot of decisions that are made in choreographic categories in every other situation in the world are made unconsciously based on how it's been before. And so I think developing this ability to be able to see and differentiate motion, to be able to move into it with a skill of not only the physical, but also what it means to bring together complex motion into a single thing I want to say it's a spiritual action. It's an action of the spirit that brings this kind of fierce joy that I feel at the center of dance.
Beautiful. No, it really was. I want to thank you, Dana, so much for the opportunity to talk to you and to learn, and also the chance that, reading this book, it's really kind of resonated in me on many levels. So thank you for writing this and for sharing your thoughts and your process and ideas.
Well, thank you so much, Anton. It's such a pleasure to talk with you and to think about these things. I appreciate how you're tying together all the practices of artists and bringing them out as ways to think about what is being practiced, because I think that's really important. And for me, in general, the more I practice in all these areas, the more I think about how everything has to do with understanding, recognizing categories and making decisions. So actually, I'm writing another book right now, which is based on 20 questions that have to do with decisions that we're already making in every situation and what it means to illuminate those. So I'm really excited about thinking about that, and like what you mentioned about when you realize something about a strategy. That's what makes me excited, is when I see people go like, okay, please think about that. So thank you for having me today.
Thanks for watching. I hope you found this interview interesting and inspiring. If you like our content, consider subscribing to our channel and help our small community grow even further. Also, make sure that you have a look at our full playlist with all the previous interviews we have done before, where you can find many interesting artists and learn more about them and their work. From me, Anton Waldbauer, and on behalf of Deep Dive Dance, we thank you and we'll see you next time.